Welcome everybody to this week's Climate Solution Caucus. We have quite a few items up for today. We've been requested a few times by various legislators to give an update and overview in terms of what the status is with, in particular, the Inflation Reduction Act. If you recall, this passed 2 Augusts ago. So for the general public, it should feel like, where's the money? But there is a whole process involved in that. So we're going to give, because of people's schedules and because we're in crossover, we're going to be trying to do 2 things at once. One of them is give you the update on various funding pots of money, geared mostly towards what you could share with your constituents. So mostly towards what can they do to their home? What can they do to their transportation, et cetera? And then sprinkled throughout that discussion, we're going to have very quick, high-level updates on the various climate solution priority bills that we identified earlier in the session that are here, that are making their way both on the House as well as the Senate. So first up, we have Chair Coffey from House Transportation. And I'll leave.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you, Sarah. I think I know I have my back to some folks. So Gabrielle asked me to be kind of quick. So I'm going to try to speak slowly, but speak at a high level and to speak to what we've passed out in this year's transportation bill, which is the House Bill 868, and to speak specifically to the climate things that we have in that bill. And I just want to give a special shout out to members of our committee, but also to Molly Burke, who was a lead co-sponsor on H693, which was the Transportation Infrastructure and Resiliency Act. And many of you signed on to that bill. And I'm so excited that we got most of that bill from H693 into this year's T-bill. Which was really because we have a really great committee. And we had a lot of advocates and supporters who are in the room here today who helped us do that too. So I just want to express my appreciation. So some highlights. I think I know that you're going to be hearing about electric vehicle incentives. Are you interested in electric vehicle supply equipment? Transitioning to helping Vermonters transition to electric vehicles is one of our key tools in reaching our targets and reducing carbon emissions in the transportation sector. So we have funding we're confident that will last us through the rest of this year with EV incentives. We're making some tweaks to make sure to give a little bit more flexibility because we're really excited to share that there is an uptick. There was concern that there wouldn't be, but there really is an uptick. And some people are utilizing the stacking of these incentives to really get into EVs at an affordable rate. The other barrier for some folks is the charging anxiety. So around EV infrastructure. And we got $21 million in federal money to do a fast charging network. And that work is underway. And we're excited to see that start to go out. An important complementary program has been done with the AECCD to bring community charging into multi-unit dwellings or for renters, multi-unit dwellings, workplace charging, and downtown attractions. And Green Mountain Power has been a really great partner in that work. And I'm really super excited that we were able to, there was no recommended funding in the governor's proposed budget, and we were able to find $1.7 million to continue that work because that pipeline is strong. It's coming in and the money is going to be out, and and we're really excited that we were able to do this, which we hope will be a bridge to next year. So happy to talk more about that, but just that was a big maneuver, and we were able to do that. I also wanted to say that we got some money for e-bikes in the bill, which is always like a much harder thing to do than one might think it should be. We know that not only do they help us reduce our carbon emissions, but walkable and bikeable communities is a big priority for the health and wellness of our communities as well. So it has a co-benefit. This year, we have an additional $4 million that's available to communities for bike ped projects, which is hugely important. And then I don't want to shortchange, but a really, 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 really significant part of this year's bill is that we finally got key partners, the Agency of Transportation, the Agency of Natural Resources, the Climate Action Office, and the state treasurer was a huge partner in coming to the table to finally, we need another tool in our toolbox to reach our targets and looking at cap and invest finally. And we have funding through a grant that is, yeah, that was huge. And I want to, and the Climate Council was, members of the Climate Council were hugely important to this. I want to thank Joey Miller, who was really fantastic to work with on this, because the Climate Council came together and amended the Climate Action Plan, and we aligned this study and this funding exactly with that. And involving the treasurer, like it's about reducing carbon emissions, but also investing. It's a financial tool. And we want to be sure that affordability is considered and analyzed, but also the revenue that can come in to help us continue to do the work. Other states that have started to do this are using this revenue to fund EV incentives. So as an example, so having Treasurer Pichek involved is hugely important. So those are the big, how'd I do on time? Those are the big highlights. And we're going to be speaking about this at our public caucus on Tuesday morning. And I think the bill is going to either be hitting the floor Tuesday later in the day. We're talking about scheduling, or Wednesday. So happy, I don't know how you want to run this, but I'm available, and members of our committee are available for questions too. So
thank you so much, Chair. And I'll just add one key element for those of you who've been around for a while: transportation, climate initiative. Those efforts were critical. What's really exciting is right now next door, New York State is supposed to, per executive order, I believe, roll out a cap and invest program that they do want other states to join as of January 2025. So I am so glad to hear this, because if we have New York State right next to us doing this, then we start to actually be able to build upon, a plan moving forward.
And
So
New York
thank
State
you.
is specifically called out, as is the Western Climate Initiative, which we can also participate in, even though we're not geographically next to each other. So
I'm going to hold questions because we have like 6 more speakers. Thank you so much, Chair.
absolutely.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
I just want to give credit to Chair Coffey for really moving this conversation about the
Yeah.
funding. So
Thank you.
And it came out an 11-0 vote too. So
Thank you, Chair. Next up, we have Melissa Bailey. She is, I don't know if your title has changed, but Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources from the Public Service Department. You'll see we do have a presentation up. This is an old presentation. It was submitted and presented at the VCAN Summit December 6th of last year. But understanding that I asked everyone to speak with very short timeframes, we offered to pull this up and go straight to the IRA slide, since that is the area of most interest. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have a presentation at 1. I think Jordan was going to move us to slide 4. 3.
Yep,
Slide
thanks.
3.
Thanks, Representative Stebbins, and I'll dive right in with a just quick introduction and get to the content. Thanks for inviting me to speak today, and I apologize I couldn't be there in person. So Melissa Bailey, I'm actually the Director of the State Energy Office at the Department of Public Service. I've moved on from the Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources position, and the State Energy Office division within the department is actually a new division created in recognition of the significant amount of federal funding flowing through Vermont. For folks who don't know, the department represents the public interest in utility and energy matters, and also conducts comprehensive energy planning for the state. And again, we're designated as the State Energy Office, and in that capacity, we receive significant amounts of funding from the Federal Department of Energy, related to climate and energy programs. As the committee, as you all know, as the caucus knows, there's been a significant uptick in federal funds flowing to the states in recent years during and after the pandemic, with the passage of ARPA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. So Representative Stebbins asked that I provide the caucus with an update specific to these Inflation Reduction Act funded home energy rebate programs that the Department of Energy is funding at the state level. So diving right in, the home energy rebates encompass two distinct programs. So one of those is the home efficiency rebates program that's called HER or HOMES. And largely in broad strokes, that program is intended to support weatherization type projects. The second program is the home electrification and appliance rebate program. Here, it does make the acronyms a little tricky to have a HER and HERE program, but that is what we have before us. So you will hear me probably call them the weatherization and electrification program. That's kind of the substantive distinction between these two programs. Vermont, as it says in the slide, is expected to receive roughly 29 million for each of those two buckets. These are formula funds, and all that means is that basically the federal government has identified the proportion of funding that is expected to go to each state. We still have to apply, but formula funds are different and distinct from competitive funds. The assumption is that if we put up a reasonable application that meets DOE's requirements, we will receive those funds in that amount. So diving in, DOE charged the states with designing programs and applying for the funds under these two specific buckets. If we go to, I believe, the next slide, I'm not going to talk about solar for all today. If we go to the next slide, I think that gives a little bit more detail on what the funds can be used for. Actually, I don't have those slides, but essentially, as I mentioned, sorry, I think it's slide 9 or 8 and 9 are the ones that provide, the detail on the specific programs. So apologies if we can go back to 8. That's the home efficiency rebates, the ones we're calling weatherization. These incentives are based on the amount of energy savings you can achieve in a home, and they're tiered by income level. So there are higher incentive amounts for folks who are below 80% of area median income. That is all these rebate amounts that you see on the slide. The energy savings amounts required and the income guidelines are specified in the IRA statute. So there's no, not really flexibility there. Let's see. So again, DOE has asked the states to design programs. They have discretion within each of these funding buckets around which eligible uses will be included in their programs. Most states that have existing efficiency and electrification programs are incorporating these funds into those programs. I'm just going to make a quick note before getting more into the specifics. A few notes on timing. Again, as Representative Stebbins noted, the IRA passed in August of 2022, so just over a year and a half ago at this point. And there is sometimes we hear the sentiment of where's the money? We get those calls from customers as well. DOE issued its guidance around how the funds can be spent in July 2023. They revised that guidance in October 2023. And the application deadline for these funds is January 2025. And funds need to be expended by September 2031. So there's a pretty extensive timeline over which these efficiency funds can be spent. So our overall thinking in designing both sets of programs has been to identify gaps in service delivery. So what are the existing gaps in the landscape of efficiency and electrification programs that Vermont already has? As you know, we have some pretty robust programs. For the HOMES money or the HER money, which we're looking at right now, we really have the intention of expecting to prioritize funding for the low-income weatherization assistance program first. That's really what we see as the most desirable focus for these efficiency funds. And I can speak to a little bit why. For one, the types of measures that are allowed, insulation, air sealing, kind of shell improvements that are embedded in the HOMES or HER program are consistent with what the low-income weatherization assistance program is delivering now. And I think folks probably know, but the weatherization assistance program is administered by the Office of Economic Opportunity, housed in the Department of Children and Families over at the Agency of Human Services, and the implementation happens through 5 community action agencies that are dispersed around the state, and they deliver these weatherization services to households at a pace of around 800 to 1,000 households per year. Vermont has struggled, frankly, to identify consistent and ongoing sustainable funding for the weatherization assistance program. In currently, the state devoted 45 million of ARPA funds. I believe that happened in the 2021 budget. And so they're in the process of spending this 45 million. They've ramped up staffing and really accelerated the pace of weatherization, which is great. And they face a funding cliff essentially when those ARPA dollars taper off at the end of 2026. So we're seeing these IRA funds as a natural extension to allow that really valuable work for the lowest of income households to continue. I can jump over to the HERE electrification program. We're frankly not as far along with the planning for this program, but we are currently engaged in conversations around what is the best use of funds for these electrification rebates. So again, you'll see the eligible technologies that we could include in our programs listed here. There's a maximum of 14,000 in rebates that can be given to any individual household, and eligible electrification measures include heat pumps and water heaters, as well as panel upgrades to enable those activities. We expect that probably about our proposal will likely include half of this funding roughly going to OEO as well, going to the weatherization assistance program as well. And the intent there would be to allow the weatherization assistance providers to do the electrification measures at the same time that they're weatherizing homes. They're doing a little bit of that now, again, with the ARPA dollars that they have, as well as some money that they've received under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And again, in order for that work to continue through 2031 would be our hope. We'd estimate that we could spend about half of this money, again, putting in heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, specifically into low-income households in Vermont. And so I didn't specifically say this, but the low-income definition in the IRA is below 80% of area median income, and that is consistent with the income threshold currently in place in Vermont for eligibility for the weatherization assistance program. So there's alignment there. And so we'd expect to devote a significant portion of these funds to OEO as well. The other, kind of the remaining funds, we are still engaged with the energy efficiency utilities. So that's Efficiency Vermont, Burlington Electric Department, and Vermont Gas Systems in Vermont around how to deploy the remaining amount of this funds. I'll say that probably the areas of investment under most serious consideration right now are in the multifamily sector. That's been identified by the EEUs as a gap, as somewhere that they're not able to make as much progress as they would like. I think the legislature is aware of the challenges to serving rental properties as opposed to single family homes. So we're looking creatively to see how we can make those offerings more robust in Vermont. We also recognize there's significant interest in heat pump incentives, and we're exploring whether heat pump incentives could be offered to households, again, not just those going through WAP, but potentially moderate income households. Let's see. We haven't, again, we haven't made our program decisions yet. We're expecting to hold a public meeting this spring to solicit feedback on kind of what we'd see as preliminary proposals, and then use those to formulate an application to DOE. Our hope is that application to DOE can go in June of this year. Again, the deadline is not until next January, but we would love to. In an ideal world, we'd love to have dollars in hand and rolling out programs in January 2025. And that's, of course, dependent on how quickly DOE can move to deploy these funds. Just in terms of a status update, 4 states have applied for this electrification funding. None have applied for the weatherization funding. So DOE will be processing essentially 100 applications from each of the states for these 2 distinct programs, and they have not given, they will not commit to a timeline by which funds will be released, but we're optimistic that if we get our application in June, we might receive funds in the fall. I can just really quickly, I forgot to check how I was doing on timing, really just quickly mention a couple of the challenges we're working through around the DOE requirements. One, I think most notably, is income verification. So DOE is requiring us to verify income for households that participate in these rebate programs, and that's not a practice that's currently in play in Vermont for the most part for energy programs. The low income weatherization program does do income verification of clients. So that's another reason that that is an attractive place to send these monies. The efficiency utilities and the distribution utilities who roll out tier 3 programs rely on self-attestation of income. And DOE has signaled that that is not going to pass muster with them for these rebate programs. So we need to work through the complications of actual income verification in our program design before we finalize our application. There are some other questions around what kind of software DOE will accept for demonstrating energy savings. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here with you all. There are requirements around heat pumps needing to offset to be the primary heating source in the home, so not just a supplemental heating source, and a need to demonstrate that you're actually offsetting more than half of the home's heating load in order to be eligible for a rebate. And then there are some questions around the maximum rebate amounts allowed. So for instance, DOE has said that for weatherizing a home, the maximum cost or the maximum allowable cost would be around $8,000. And we're seeing from our weatherization providers that those costs in Vermont are coming in around $15,000. So we intend to petition to DOE for some flexibility there. So I think I'll leave it there. I don't know if we have time. I have time for questions if you all do.
I'm going to propose, if it's okay with you, Melissa, that when we're done with this meeting, we'll share, even though this is old, and folks, please recognize that this is an old presentation. We just pulled it up because it's helpful to actually look at something on the screen. If it's okay with you, Melissa, we will share this presentation and then Patrick's as well to the caucus. And we'll share your email, if that's okay, in case people have specific questions, particularly since this is really a ... We're waiting, we're working, it's coming.
That all works for me, and I'm happy to come back and give an update in the future as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Sure. Thanks all.
Really appreciate it. I also just want to remind folks, there are, already I printed it way too small, but like Efficiency Vermont has, up to, I think it's $6,000 for various heat pump deals. Like, there are things already available through BED, Vermont Gas, Efficiency Vermont. And if you go to the Department of Energy's website, you can see, unlike the IRA, unlike the incentives and rebates, the tax credits are already, for the most part, available and out there. So we could share this link as well. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to Patrick from VTrans. Thank you so much, Patrick, for coming. And he updated his presentation as of 5:30 this morning. So thank you.
Sure. For the record, Patrick Murphy, Vermont Agency of Transportation. We work in the new division, a new section there for environmental policy sustainability. So I've got about 5 minutes budgeted for 7 programs and across state and federal funding sources. So we'll just dive right in. And the slides will be shared so you can refer back to them if you have any questions. In short, this slide is just showing you what you all did last year. There were a number of changes that were made to the incentive programs that allow the agency to have the authority to make changes so that we could essentially get as much money out as quickly as possible to those who need it most. And that was fairly successful. We can go to the next slide. So this is showing you the incentive program for new plug-in electric vehicles. The green and yellow are fully electric vehicles. So more money is going to all electric vehicles. And then the green is the income tier that is for lowest income. So we're getting more money to fully electric vehicles, more money to those with lowest incomes. Next slide. Mileage Smart, there were fewer tweaks made to this program, but it has grown as it's matured. A number of dealerships throughout the state are signed up to it and are beginning to actually go out and seek inventory for their lots. And you do see some increases here in terms of green being fully electric vehicles and just an overall monthly increase. Next slide. Replace Your Ride program was one of those that there was a lot of money. All this funding came through the 2022 transportation bill, which was over $30 million for clean transportation initiatives. And 12 million of it went to the new PV program. 3 million went to the Mileage Smart program, and 3 million went to the Replace Your Ride program. It had a slow start because it had a rebate of just $3,000 for a used vehicle, and used vehicle prices had skyrocketed in the past several years. And so there wasn't the ability for people to actually take advantage of it. It was more cost effective to just trade in their vehicles for a higher amount. With the authorization from you all last year, we were able to make the change to increase that amount to $5,000, which made it more cost effective for folks to take advantage of the program. And so you see this dramatic increase in August, which is mostly continued. Typically, the first few months of the year are slower for car buying, so that's tapered off a bit. But it has seen an increase both in terms of new and used vehicles, but also the third path that allows for shared mobility options. And there's a prepaid mobility card that allows for a variety of different things like e-bikes and electric motorcycles and the rest of it. So next slide. So this is to give you just a sense of where we are, how much has been authorized historically, and then where we are right at this moment as of the end of February. We have just over $5 million left in the new PV program, just a few 100,000 left in the Mileage Smart program. There was language in the Budget Adjustment Act of this year to move $1 million from the Replace Your Ride program to Mileage Smart so that there wouldn't be a gap in the program. Replace Your Ride is moving more slowly, but it's increased over the past several months. And so there's been some repurposing of money last year and again this year, and maybe potentially again in the summer. The e-bike incentive program overall has had $255,000 authorized in mostly transportation general funds. And then we have 35,000 of that remaining. And as Chair Coffey alluded to, there was some language in this year's transportation bill to carve out another 140,000 for that program. And then we have the Electrify Your Fleet program, which is a fleet incentive for nonprofits, for municipalities, for for-profit businesses. And we've launched that in November of this past year and have seen about 27 or so incentives, mostly fully electric vehicles, but a couple of electric bicycles as well. Next slide. So this gives you a sense of what is the spend rate, because we're seeing good progress in terms of the increase is good. The decrease in funding available, of course, presents some problems for the folks in your districts that want to take advantage of the program. So anywhere from $500,000 to $600,000 being spent down each month now in the new PV program. $250,000 each month now for the Mileage Smart program. Replace Your Ride has increased to up over 100,000 for the months of December and January. And then the e-bike incentive program has slowed down, as you would expect in the middle of winter. But we anticipate that interest will again rise when we see days like this for the long term. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of where we might be later this year and into next year. The hope is that we'll be able to get to a place where all of the programs are sort of depleting this source of funding at the same time. We are working with the Agency of Natural Resources to apply for a climate pollution reduction grant, which is through the EPA. That funding opportunity opens in April 1st is the deadline for the application. But it's a quick timeline. I think the administration is wanting to get funding out as quickly as possible. And so there's anticipated July 1st awards to be announced and award agreements with EPA by October 1st. There's some contracting that always takes longer than you would hope. So it doesn't necessarily mean that state of Vermont would have, the funding to get out the door immediately on October 1st. But the hope is to be able to have all of our existing programs get to a point where they can then accept this additional federal funding. In that funding request, which is almost $100 million, there is $30 million to continue the state programs that I just talked about, with the exception of the fleet incentive. And then there is also an additional $10 million for what would be a new medium and heavy duty electric vehicle incentive program. So next slide. So that's, if there are any questions about that, happy to answer those later. Diving into EV charging infrastructure, which Chair Coffey noted is another significant barrier to EV adoption here in the state. Almost $14 million of federal funds has been authorized by you all to date for fast charging. $10 million, which was talked about, went to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development for the community charging at level 1, 2, and in some cases 3 charging. But the Agency of Transportation is focused on designated corridors, so mostly the interstates, but throughout the state highway network. And $21+ million was authorized over 5 years. There were a number of issues in terms of the rollout of this program. It was authorized in November of 2021 through the IIJA. It took many months to issue program guidelines, and then the final rules for this program were finally issued in the spring or early summer of last year. So we've been working through a number of FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, hoops to be able to get funding out the door. We're happy that our first project, which is located in Bradford, is slated to become operational in the next month. The Inflation Reduction Act, and we'll get into some of the other activities there. Inflation Reduction Act has a number of positive aspects to it for EV related issues. So there's not only the renewal of the EV charging tax credits, which will be used in a project like Bradford by the private EV charging provider to reduce the amount that we have to lay out. But it can also be used by private homeowners. It can be used by other companies throughout the state. And then there's what's really important for vehicle sales is that for the first time, starting in January of this year, the tax credits for clean vehicles have become available at the point of sale. So people don't necessarily need to have the full tax liability to capture a $4,000 or $7,500 credit on their vehicle. They can get that right at the point of sale. And when that is then added to all the other programs that you've authorized, the Replace Your Ride program, the new or used vehicle programs, and then some of the utility programs, it can be a substantial reduction off the cost of both new and used vehicles. So then carbon reduction program, I've included some links there that you can get to on our website. There's a lot in there that I'm not going to have time to go through. The key thing related to EV charging infrastructure is that we are working on putting a grant program together so that where there are interoperable stations throughout our fast charging network here in the state, that we can go in and replace that equipment, but also increase the amount of charging and redundancy that we see in the network. So more on that later. Federal competitive grants exist to complement what we're already doing. We've applied for one. We're unsuccessful in the first round, but we'll continue to apply for both corridor and community charging grants. through that IIJA funding source. And then lastly, the Federal Highway Administration is really working now on medium heavy duty planning, electric freight planning. And we've been participating in multi-state organizations to work towards what we need to achieve there to support the early adoption of those vehicles. The next slide. So this is years 1 and 2. The federal program, NEVI program, requires that we submit an annual plan. This is what we've mapped out as locations to build out the network first. It's a designation of fully built out, certified by FHWA. So it's once we are able to get to that point, we will have more flexibility with the federal funding thereafter. So this is where we're looking to start to build some more redundancy in the network, particularly where there are confluence of multiple routes. And so our priorities have been listed here. I won't go through those. The key thing to note here is that not only is our first site going to come online in the next month, we're also going to be issuing this month the request of qualifications that will build a list of qualified providers to start building out this network. From there, we'll issue RFPs later in May or June, and then we hope to get under contract before the end of the year all of these stations, all these station locations, I should say.
Patrick, thank you.
Sure.
Recognizing that people are going to start to have to go back to committee. Is this your last slide or?
I think so.
I think
hope
so.
so.
Okay.
It is.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I don't know if you guys can tell, there are a lot of efforts, a lot of dollars going out the door. We will send out the 2 slide sets and the contacts. And thank you so much,
Sure.
Patrick.
Okay.
Thank you.
Enjoy. Take
Really
care.
appreciate all your work. Thank you. Really quick update, Res, we are supposed to be seeing an updated joint fiscal note soon. We are seeing the NEO next bill make its way through.
Yeah, just one word on that is that we're starting to see some bubbling up of misinformation around the Neonex bill. So if you have questions or if you hear from folks or if you're hearing things around the building, please come to me or send people to me or send me their way. It's a really good bill. The data is on our side, lots of protections to make sure just transition for farmers. And it'll come to the floor soon.
Yeah, similarly with Res, the joint fiscal note will be lower than what was initially estimated. But if you have questions, feel free to come to me, or you can also go to Rep. Sibilia, who will be the floor presenter on the bill. And I'm gonna, Senator Vahovsky, can you speak for 1 minute, like 30 seconds? Okay, thank you so much for joining. And then we're gonna segue to Rep. Bongartz, who's going to give you an update on the Act 250 bill that House E&E has been working on.
Perfect. So I believe I'm here to give you a quick update on S259, which is the climate
That is
change super
lighter
fund.
here, yes.
Okay, perfect. So we came to an agreement this morning with A&R on a bill that works for them. We've added some expanded language on what that can be used for to make sure that it can be used for housing and home buyouts. And what the big change, so we extended the covered period. So it now begins in 1995 and will end in December of 2024. And we pushed out the rulemaking deadline by a year. What we heard from A&R is that in order to work with the climate under the requirements of the climate justice law that we passed a couple of years ago, they would just need a little bit more time. And so we've added a deadline to file to begin the process, and then a later deadline to actually have the rulemaking done. We expect to have the newest draft of that in the morning and vote that right out of committee tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, I'm going to let people reach you if you have
Perfect.
questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to run to the floor.
Thank you. I am recognizing it's 12:50. We asked Rep. Bongartz to come. I don't know if you can do it in 3 or 4 minutes. It's only 123 pages.
Really quickly, I can come back next week if you'd rather.
We don't meet next week.
Okay.
So give 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Last year in the Home Act, S100, we commissioned 3 studies. one to be done by the NRB, looking at how to make the NRB, the whole Act 250 process run better. One that the regional commissions asked us to do, saying, make us do consistent mapping across the state. So we told them, we set up a process for that to happen. And then the Agency of Housing and Economic Development did a study to look at how to simplify the designation program and how to be able to spread the benefits of that program more widely, especially the more rural communities. So the bill that we've been working on, I was going to use the word semester, but the first half of the biennium of this year is to take those three studies. They all work together. There was real consensus across the three. They're all cross-pollinated, and take them and to bring them to life in a bill. And so in the we really work to mix Act 250 governance with a professional board hearing appeals, because when that went away 20 years ago, when they took away the board hearing appeals, it cut the head off the program, in at least my view. And that's why there are, to the extent there are issues about consistency and everything, is because there's not a good governance structure. This reinstills a really good governance structure. It does, from an ecological point of view, it creates three tiers in Act 250. Tier 1 and there's Tier 1A and Tier 1B. Tier 1A is, I'm just going to use real shorthand here, larger towns, sophisticated planning, zoning, all kinds of other checklists, plus sewer and water. Those towns, if they go through the process and if they appear on the Act 250 map, on the Regional Commission maps as eligible for Tier 1A status, can apply to the board for Tier 1A status. What Tier 1A status does is that in the areas that get designated as such, Act 250 will no longer adhere. One of the requirements is that they can effectively administer the criteria. So it's not, so anyway, that's Tier 1A. Tier 3 is to look at critical natural resources rather than have all of Vermont be governed simply by the size of the project. It's to look at actually having jurisdiction determined not always by the size of the project, but by the resource impacted. And so Tier 3 has the board go through a rulemaking process to establish critical natural resource areas that will be automatic jurisdictional triggers for Act 250. So on the one hand, removing or lessening with 1As jurisdiction in areas that can really have proven, and there's checkups on this, by the way, can do it themselves. On the other hand, really protecting resources that need to be protected. I left out Tier 1B. My 3 minutes is probably almost up, but Tier 1B is for the next size of towns down that have sewer, water, or soils that can handle a community system. And they have planning, zoning, and subdivision regulations. Those can be Tier 1 towns if they so choose. They'll be on the maps, RPC maps, and those towns can build to 50 units of housing without the 50 units of housing going through the Act 250 process. So they have to meet the requirements to show that they can handle that on their own. Everything in the middle is Tier 2, and Tier 2 changes only to the extent that the old road rule is brought back. That was part of the consensus developed over the summer, but a different road rule, but a road rule to trigger jurisdiction with the goal of being to cluster housing rather than have roads going straight up the mountainside. That's the shortest version I can possibly give of that.
The only two pieces I'll add is we heard a lot about the fact that we cannot make all these decisions from Montpelier, that we need local process. So much of the defining, what is a critical resource area? Much of all of that process is now through rulemaking, so that there is it's not easy, but there is an opportunity for private property owners, for towns, you name it, to get involved. And then also we added $200,000 in addition to the governor's recommend to the RPCs to do a really broad statewide public outreach process over more than a year. I think it's 14 months or so, because we also had the Flood Safety Act, presumably coming from the Senate, and that relates to river corridors. So we've been really hearing that this needs to be not just from Montpelier on high, but really very much discussing, bringing people to the conversation. So if you look at the bill and you say, why is that unfinished? It's purposeful. It's so that we can start this conversation about how to plan as effectively as.
Robust public process, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you.